The napkin was still folded in my lap when my mother's hand closed around my wrist. Not gentle. Not the way you touch a daughter on her birthday. Her nails pressed 4 small crescents into my skin, and she leaned in close enough that I could smell the champagne on her breath. "Smile," she whispered. "Everyone's watching." I smiled. 25 years old, and I still knew how to smile on command. Across the restaurant, 3 tables away, a family I didn't recognize was laughing over a chocolate cake with my name on it. My name. Spelled correctly. Down to the middle initial only 4 people on earth were supposed to know. My mother's grip tightened. "Don't," she said. "Don't you dare ask." My name is Wren Callahan, and 3 months before that night, I turned 25, having done exactly what my parents always told me a Callahan was supposed to do. Build something real. I'd started a small logistics consulting firm out of a spare bedroom when I was 22, with $4,000 in savings and a laptop with a cracked hinge. By the time I turned 25, that company, Meridian Route Solutions, was pulling in $1.8 million a year in contracts, mostly from regional distribution companies who needed someone to untangle their shipping chaos. I'd hired 6 people. I'd bought my first home, a modest 3-bedroom outside Charlotte, cash, no mortgage, because I watched my father spend 30 years terrified of debt, and I'd absorbed that fear like a second skeleton. My parents, Neil and Diane Callahan, raised me in a house where love was conditional and gratitude was mandatory. I'd spent my whole life trying to earn the first by performing the second. When Meridian started doing well, I did what any daughter still hungry for approval does. I gave them money. $60,000 over 2 years in pieces. A new roof. A used Lexus for my mother. Emergency wire transfers that were never explained and never questioned, because you don't question family. That night, my 25th birthday, was supposed to be a dinner at Larchmont, the nicest restaurant in the city, a reservation I'd paid for myself. 12 people. My parents. My aunt. Old family friends. I did not know, when I walked in wearing the green dress my mother had picked out for me, that the word disowned was already sitting in my father's mouth, waiting for dessert. And I definitely did not know that 3 tables away, under warm string lights, sat a family who had been looking for me for 23 years. Dinner started fine. That was the worst part, looking back, how normal it felt. My father ordered the same scotch he always ordered. My mother complimented the flowers, then complained they weren't the right shade of white. My Aunt Carol asked about Meridian's revenue in that overly casual tone people use when they're doing math in their head. Then, halfway through the entrees, my father set down his fork with a precision that should have warned me. He wiped his mouth. He looked at me the way you look at a stranger who's about to be told bad news. "Wren," he said, "your mother and I have decided it's time you understood something about your place in this family." I remember the exact temperature of the room dropping. "We've given you everything," my mother said, her voice pitched for the whole table to hear, not just me. "The house. The stability. The Callahan name. And you've never once acted like you understood what that cost us." "I gave you $60,000, I said quietly. $60,000, my father repeated, and he actually laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You think that makes us even? You think a check erases 25 years of raising someone else's?" He stopped himself, but not fast enough. My Aunt Carol's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Someone else's what?" I asked. My mother's hand found my wrist under the table before I'd even finished the sentence, for crescents pressed into skin that would still be faintly bruised 2 days later. "This isn't the place," she hissed. My father straightened his jacket, a navy blazer, the same one he wore to church, to funerals, to anything he considered a performance, and announced, loud enough for 3 nearby tables to hear, that as of tonight, I was no longer welcome to use the Callahan name in connection with my business, my home, or my future. That I had outgrown my usefulness to this family. That effective immediately I was, in his exact word, disowned. The whole restaurant went quiet in that specific way restaurants go quiet when they're pretending not to listen. That's when I saw the cake 3 tables away with my name on it. I stood up, not dramatically, just to get air. And my eyes landed on a table I hadn't noticed before, tucked near the window. A man in his 50s. A woman about the same age, her hand pressed to her mouth. A younger man, maybe 30, staring at me like I was a ghost. Between them a cake. White frosting, blue script. Happy 25th, Everly. Everly. Not Ren. I didn't approach them that night. I went home, iced my wrist, and did what I do best. I opened a spreadsheet. 3 days later, I drove 2 hours to the county records office where I was born and requested my original birth certificate, the long-form version, the one hospitals file before any adoption paperwork gets processed. The clerk handed it to me in a manila envelope. I opened it in the parking lot. Mother, Renata Ashworth. Father, Thomas Ashworth. Child's name at birth, Everly Rose Ashworth. I sat in my car for 40 minutes before I could start the engine. I called my mother that night. I kept my voice level, which I'd already learned was more unsettling to her than yelling. I have my original birth certificate, I said. I know I was adopted. I know my name was Everly. I want to know why you never told me, and I want to know who was at Larchmont 3 tables away. There was a long pause. Then my father's voice, he'd taken the phone. There was a private, closed adoption facilitated under a pre-2001 interstate compact agreement, he said, each word polished like he'd rehearsed it. Records were sealed under a reciprocal confidentiality statute. We were legally advised at the time that disclosure could void the placement retroactively. We protected you from a legal gray area. That's all this was. It was a good lie. It had the right shape, dates, statutes, the passive tension of legally advised. I'd built a company on believing people who sounded confident, and some old stupid part of me wanted to believe him. I said, that makes sense. I'm sorry I brought it up like that. I hung up and I did not believe a single word. 2 weeks later, I stopped by my parents' house to drop off a box of my old things, a pretext. I let myself in through the side door, the one that never locked, the way I had my whole childhood. I heard my mother's voice from the kitchen before I turned the corner. She actually believed the interstate compact thing. She was saying, laughing, to my Aunt Carol. Neil made that up on the phone in about 4 seconds. There's no compact. We paid an agency $11,000 in 2001 and never filed a single court disclosure. It was never sealed. It was just never filed. Carol laughed too. God, she's gullible for someone who runs a whole company. I stood in the hallway with my hand on the wall, and I did not make a sound. The lie about the sealed records was bad. What I found after was worse. I hired a private records researcher, a woman named Priya Deshmukh who specialized in adoption reunification, and paid her $2,200 to trace the original agency file. It took her 11 days. The agency, Hearthstone Family Services, had closed in 2009 amid a state investigation into falsified consent documentation. Priya found a name on the intake form for my birth mother's case that made my stomach drop. My father's signature as a facilitator, not a parent. Neil Callahan had worked part-time for Hearthstone in 2001, arranging placements. He hadn't adopted me through a stranger's agency. He'd adopted me through his own job. And the surrender paperwork Priya eventually located, the real version, not the story I'd been told, showed my birth mother, Renata Ashworth, had signed under what the file's internal notes called financial duress counseling, a term Priya told me was, quote, agency language for we talked a scared, broke 20-year-old into it. My birth family hadn't given me up freely. They'd been steered. And my adoptive father had been the one steering. I made a decision sitting in my car outside Priya's office, and it was the most tactical decision of my adult life. I was going to become someone my parents could dismiss again. I understood something about Neil and Diane Callahan that I'd understood since I was 8 years old. They only ever underestimated the people they'd already decided were beneath them. The moment I looked competent, they got careful. The moment I looked confused and small, they got careless. Careless people talk. So I called my mother the next morning, and I let my voice shake. Not fake tears, just a flattened, tired register I used to use as a kid when I wanted to be left alone. I don't understand any of this, I said. I don't know what's true. I just want things to go back to normal. Can we forget the birth certificate thing? I don't want to lose you guys. I heard the relief in her exhale. For the next 6 weeks, I played a version of myself I hadn't been since I was 19. I stopped correcting my father when he oversimplified Meridian's finances at dinner. I let my mother pick my outfits again, the cardigan she liked, the flats she said were more appropriate than my heels. I slouched slightly at family gatherings, posture I'd read once, does more to signal submission than tone of voice ever does. I carried a small spiral notebook everywhere, the kind a scattered person carries, and made a show of trying to keep track of things. Writing nonsense grocery lists in front of them while my actual research sat encrypted on a laptop they'd never once asked to see. Internally, I was doing math. If they thought I was fragile, they'd stop hiding things from me. If they stopped hiding things, they'd hand me the rope themselves. It worked faster than I expected. Within a month, my father was talking business in front of me again, including a phrase I'd flag later as the first real crack: the Ashworth situation. I set 3 pieces of bait. The first was a fake business opportunity. I told my father in my new soft, uncertain voice that Meridian had been approached about a $400,000 acquisition offer, and that I didn't know what to do, and might need him to help me handle the paperwork. It was a lie. There was no offer. But I knew my father, a man who'd once tried to get power of attorney over my finances just in case when I was 22, wouldn't be able to resist involving himself in something with a dollar figure attached. The second was a document, left deliberately visible on my kitchen counter during a dinner I hosted. A folder labeled Meridian Succession Planning, containing nothing but blank pages and 1 real page. A mock beneficiary form with a line for primary contact left blank. Bait for anyone who went looking. The third was the one that mattered. I bought a small recording device, legal under my state's one-party consent law, and clipped it inside my jacket at every family gathering from that point forward. I also, with Priya's help, reached out carefully and quietly to Renata Ashworth, my birth mother. 61 years old, living 40 minutes away, and it turned out the man at the table 3 tables away that night had been my birth father, Thomas, and the younger man beside them, my birth brother, Caleb. They had never stopped looking for me. Every year on my birthday for 18 years, they had ordered a cake with the name they'd given me and sat in a public place near where they believed I might be, on the small chance I'd see it. I asked Renata one favor: to come to my parents' wedding anniversary dinner in 3 weeks, and to bring the original, unaltered adoption file her lawyer still held, the one Hearthstone had given to birth parents, not the one given to adoptive parents like my father. Then I waited. For 3 weeks, my phone sat in my bag at every family dinner, recording, buzzing faintly against my hip whenever a notification came through from Priya with another confirmed detail. Every dinner I sat there in my cardigan, nodding along while underneath the table, evidence accumulated in real time. The anniversary dinner was at Larchmont again. My mother had insisted. She liked the symmetry, she said, though she had no idea how right she was. 40 guests. String lights. My father in the navy blazer. He was 3 drinks in when he started performing for the table, the way he did when he wanted an audience. You know, he said, gesturing at me with his scotch, we had our doubts about this one for a while. Gullible kid. Believed every story we ever told her. Laughter around the table. My mother didn't stop him. Takes after her real family, I guess, he added, and smiled like it was clever. Whoever they were. That was the cue. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I have never once needed to raise my voice to be heard. Since we're talking about my real family, I said, I'd like to introduce them. Renata Ashworth stood from a table near the window, the same table I'd made sure as 3 weeks earlier, and walked toward us holding a thin folder. Beside her, Thomas. Beside him, my birth brother, Caleb. The color left my father's face in a way I will remember for the rest of my life. This is the surrender paperwork Hearthstone Family Services gave my birth parents in 2001, I said, laying the folder on the table, open, facing my father. It says financial duress counseling. Your version, the one you told me on the phone, was a fabricated legal statute. There is no interstate compact. I checked. There never was. Ren, this isn't the place. My mother started. You said that at my last birthday too, I said. I remember. I turned to my father. You worked at Hearthstone in 2001. You facilitated my placement into your own home. Renata was 20 years old, unemployed, and $11,000 in debt to a man who then adopted her daughter through the same agency that counseled her into signing. I have the intake file. I have the signature. I have a recording from 6 weeks ago of you and Mom laughing about how gullible I was for believing the story you made up. I pulled the small recorder from my jacket and set it on the white tablecloth between the breadbasket and my father's scotch. There's no compact, it played in my mother's voice, tinny but unmistakable. There's no compact. Neil made that up on the phone in about 4 seconds. The table went utterly silent. I'm not here to destroy anyone, I said, calm the whole time, the way I'd been calm through 6 weeks of pretending to be small. I'm here to correct the record. My name is Everly Ashworth. It was before it was ever Ren Callahan. And I think everyone at this table should know exactly what kind of man arranged that. My father stood up so fast his chair hit the floor. You ungrateful little. Careful, I said quietly. There's a recorder still running. He lunged, not at me but at the folder, and Renata, my birth mother, moved faster than a woman her age should have been able to, snatching it back against her chest. I picked up the champagne flute in front of me, the one my mother had poured for a toast that would never happen, and I didn't throw it. I simply turned it over, slowly, deliberately, and let it empty across the table onto the anniversary card my mother had spent a week choosing. The ink bled instantly, the careful cursive dissolving into a gray smear. 25 years, I said. For a toast you don't get to make. A restaurant manager, then 2 uniformed officers who'd been quietly called by Renata's lawyer 20 minutes earlier, Priya's advice in case things escalated, arrived at the table just as my father was shouting for everyone to sit back down, that this was a family matter. It stopped being a family matter, one officer said, when a licensed adoption agency's fraud came up in a documented recording. We'll need everyone to remain seated. What happened over the following 4 months unraveled faster than I expected. Neil Callahan was named in a state licensing board complaint tied to Hearthstone's now decade-old fraud investigation. Because he'd worked as a facilitator on at least 3 other placements the board was already re-examining, prosecutors reopened the file. He avoided criminal charges, the statute of limitations had run out on most of it, but he lost his standing on 2 nonprofit boards he'd sat on for 15 years, boards that, it turned out, cared quite a lot about moral character clauses once local news picked up the story. Diane Callahan's social circle, the country club committee women she'd spent decades cultivating, quietly stopped inviting her to things. Not dramatically. Just the invitations thinned then stopped. My Aunt Carol sent one text 3 weeks after the dinner. I didn't know it was that bad. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Meridian's own reputation, if anything, grew. A local business journal ran a piece on my adoption story. I gave 1 interview, careful and factual, no theatrics, and 3 new clients signed with the company specifically citing it, saying they wanted to work with someone who handled hard things with a level head. I made 1 act of grace during that period that I'm more proud of than the confrontation itself. My father's small consulting practice, a 2-person operation, employed a receptionist named Doris who'd worked for him for 11 years and had nothing to do with any of it. When his business finally folded under the reputational damage, I quietly covered 3 months of her salary through a temporary placement at Meridian while she found new work. She never knew it was me until much later. I didn't tell her to thank me. I told her to take the job because she'd earned it on her own merits, which she had. It rained the night my father showed up at my door. 6 weeks after the anniversary dinner. No coat, just a soaked blazer. Not the navy one, an older one frayed at the cuffs. He looked smaller than I remembered. 61 years old and standing on a porch like a stranger. Ren, he said. Then he caught himself. Everly. I don't have anywhere else. Your mother and I we're not doing well. I just need somewhere to stay for a few nights. Please. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. Behind me in the kitchen I could hear Marcus, my husband, the one person who'd sat with me through every version of this, who'd held the recorder steady in his coat pocket at that dinner because my own hands had been shaking too hard, quietly turning off the stove, giving me room. You raised me to believe that love was something you had to earn, I said. I spent 25 years earning it. I'm done. I'm your father. You were the man who raised me, I said. That's not nothing. But it's also not the same as being my father, is it? Not by the paperwork you signed. He didn't have an answer for that. I hope you find somewhere warm tonight, I said, and I meant it in the small tired way you mean things for people you've released. But it isn't going to be here. I closed the door. Not hard. Just firm, the way you close something you don't intend to reopen. Marcus met me in the hallway and didn't say anything at first, just put his hand against the side of my face for a second, like he was checking I was still there. You okay? He asked. I will be, I said. And for the first time since I was 25, I actually believed it. Here's what I know now that I didn't know at that birthday dinner. The people who tell you that you have to earn your place in a family are usually the ones with the most to hide about how you got there in the first place. Real love doesn't come with the ledger. And sometimes the quietest, calmest version of yourself is the most dangerous version. Not because you're pretending to be weak, but because you're finally patient enough to let the truth do the work for you. If you were disowned by the people who raised you and you found peace anyway, I want to hear that story in the comments. If this one hit you somewhere, hit like, subscribe for more, and tell me. Would you have opened that door in the rain?